Hello, everyone. This is Data Driven Chat. And today we have Pavel Bulowski with us. I'm super happy to introduce him because we are going to talk about diversity and inclusion today. Hi, Pavel. How are you?
Hi, Anna. Very glad to be here and looking forward to an interesting chat.
Awesome. So Pavel is the Chief Marketing Officer at Miro, which is a customer data platform. He's also a creator, one of the creators at SheLovesData.com, which is a platform for women to get into data science, right? To get into data and technology, we can say. Is that correct? Did I get it right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yes, SheLovesData is a platform or community we are creating and trying to kind of steward towards enabling easier introduction of technology for women. We tend to specifically focus. We've seen kind of what's already exists in the market, and us being based in Southeast Asia and Singapore or out of Singapore, that's been critical because the diversity and inclusion has been obviously super prominent, being driven out of US, then in Europe quite a bit, and this trend came a little bit later to Asia, and actually it was one of the reasons why we started SheLovesData. We actually it's a funny anecdote, like because you know it's similar to the name of your show. We actually started what we call data-driven.sg as a community, so it was kind of more intended more as an open community for data. We used to do a bunch of hackathons, and the way it came about was that we saw an inspiration in a group where I come from Czech Republic, but been living in Singapore for a while. So what we seen in the community was a fantastic initiative by one of the local groups called Chiquitas in Czech, and they were doing these workshops called Data Girls, and that was essentially all about like basics, visualization, SQL, kind of very very basic stuff, introduction level for wider audiences group. And we saw that, and we saw like this is pretty interesting. And when we organized one of our first hackathons, which was in Singapore, I think 2017, probably one of the first few done in the data space. This was interesting, but when we look at the signups, we obviously had something like 94.5% men, as the usual story. When you go to any type of data science conference, it would be mostly guys. It's changing slowly. We are trying to contribute to that, but that's been an issue, and we saw that this is there's been very unified or I guess a very specific way of looking at things, which was very homogeneous in a way. And we saw that like this is something to address, basically because we see these trends of the diversity and inclusion coming up in Europe. And my co-founder in the business as well as in the SheLovesData is female, Jana, who has a 20+ year career in leadership in IT, and she has a computer science background, and she's seen how poor that landscape looks like when there are no women on board. And she has, her story is that she has a great experience with female analysts on her team, and really adding, color and into the picture when it comes to client solutions. So she saw the business value in it. Nothing less than that. And when we realized, we've done this hackathon, great community activation, super good participation, some very interesting solutions, it was mostly men in there. Actually, I think it was the first one or second year maybe of that event when we had a winning team, which was 50% of women. And those 50% of women was also the 2.5% of the overall participation. So it was kind of funny how you see how the diversity really actually worked for the benefit of the team. So that was quite interesting. So yeah, it all started with hackathons, participation of a room full of men, and then eventually we realized that we can throw in a workshop for women to see if there is an appetite. And I think in the first one, without any promotion, we saw just in Singapore over 300 applications. We had like 60 seats. So that was taken up in a couple of days. So the response was overwhelming. So we started kind of doing a little bit of publicity and communicating if we are doing that. And it I guess naturally kind of snowballed around our business because we were going to Australia quite a bit. and that was really the beginning, just the beginning of that story. So yeah, that's a SheLovesData and some background story to that.
I'm really excited to talk to you today because in the series, in the data-driven chat series, I was trying to get speakers who would talk about diversity and inclusion, and we kind of touched on it a little bit with some other interviewees, but we never were able to go kind of deeper into the subject. So I was curious about, for example, some of my projects, they are also directed at the female population. I'm often asked this question as well, so I'm going to ask you the same question. When we talk about diversity and inclusion in STEM or in, data science or in technology, in particular, so we normally notice that there are many different underrepresented groups. There is obviously, female group that is underrepresented, but it's not a minority group, right? So, but we also have minorities. You can talk about various racial groups. You can also talk about, say, for example, neurodiverse people. So you can talk about gay, lesbian community. So why of all possible communities, why did you decide to concentrate on women? What was the reason for that?
Yeah, I think it went, I don't want to make it sound as a business objective, but it definitely, I think all of these things have to go hand in hand with what you are doing and having some sort of symbiosis type effect, right? And we were at the time when we started this, we were about a year and a half into building a consultancy with Ganna. So we were focused around helping marketers work with data, get reporting, campaign attribution, and kind of the relatively usual scope of marketing and data services that you would see at the time. Obviously, space that's evolving pretty quickly, and we had to hire. And like, if you are in Singapore as a startup, maybe to paint the picture a little bit for people, like, you're looking at a island state of 6 million people. There is fairly diverse workforce by nature, as Singapore is a melting pot of cultures, obviously dominantly represented by some, and quite a fair amount of foreigners living there as well. So you've got the expat into the mix as well. But at the same time, it's a market that's extremely competitive, because you've got your Googles and Facebooks who've got each couple thousand people, and they're obviously picking up the top engineers and analysts and anyone really in the market that's in that ecosystem with extremely high salaries and benefit and the pedigree of the brands that, like, it's really attractive. So if you are a startup, you really have to be a little bit different. And whether you are a product or services business, it doesn't really matter. But being involved in community like that is essential, I think, for you to be able to hire well. We've done that numerous times. We've some of the key people on our team right now are originating back to the SheLovesData, or at least as a reference. So it's an important benefit. But importantly, if you look at it, there was one common theme in the conversations you were having, and there is a lack of talent for data and analytics, and it's a really fast-growing field, and the demand is really great. And the data scientist has been labeled the sexiest job of the 21st century many years ago at this point. And I think while that's a hype and an exaggeration for clickbait media, there's something definitely a truth to it. There's a big appetite in the market. But if you look, so it's really just a very rational analysis. If you look at the market and you see it's mostly guys, and I'm making for the sake of the argument, I'm making a politically incorrect shortcuts here. If you look at it as being 95% of the people in the job market are men, then if you want to enlarge it, then you probably need to tap into other big groups. So yes, it's the reason for, I guess, the focus is that the women is the biggest pool there is. So while it's a large pool that's underrepresented, yes, it's also a large pool that can add a lot of value potentially very quickly. So this was what we have seen in the beginning, and I think it's still truth, and this is why SheLovesData has been able to I guess, scale out in terms of numbers that we see in participation or even countries where we are present so quickly. Part of the success for sure.
So I'm also wondering what why about your personal motivation to go into this. So why did you feel that you had to make a difference there? So what was your personal motivation into going into this and your personal interest in diversity and inclusion at STEM? So if tell us a little bit more about your own personal journey into it.
That's interesting. So I guess my intrinsic motivation there is really a privilege. Like I've traveled quite a bit. I have not been to every single continent yet, but I have been spending last 2 years really, especially around Asia. I would say I'm fairly well traveled, and I understand things from political business context as well as your kind of a sociological first-hand experience of these countries and these cultures. And like the more time I spend away from Europe, the more I realize how very, very privileged we are with everything we have here, from healthcare to free schooling. Even though I have never went to university, or at least I've not finished one, I think still the background and the comfort of growing up and not having to draw water from a well and getting sick in the meanwhile is an extreme life of privilege. So I think I've got this inner drive that it's not necessarily about giving back. I don't think I've ever taken anything from anyone in life. It's just simply giving. It's just sharing and hoping that more people can have the same experience and that I have had. And I think this is something that's been the closest cause within the reach that we've had. So it was really easy to participate in that, I think.
So I want to kind of zoom on you a little bit and kind of stay with your motivation and what you do, just to get our audience more familiar with the work that you do. Can you tell me what do you consider the biggest achievement of your career so far? So if you had to pick one thing that you're particularly proud of, what would it be?
I think I'm super proud of my team in Mero. This is something I've never, if you asked me 10 years ago, I would never tell you that I am going to be building companies, and this has never been a drive of mine to see, my name on the wall somewhere. And that's just simply never really been there for me. As long as I was adding value, I never minded being part of a bigger organization, even especially if I saw the kind of the impact on the world that you can create through there. So that was always fun and very satisfying. But when we started building Mero, which kind of came as an offshoot from a consultancy where we had simply one client who came in and said, look, we are considering building a single view of customer for marketing purposes, and everybody's telling us different thing, and we realized we have a lot of data, which was kind of a segue into the proposition under which we built the Mero, and realized we are building a customer data platform, which is a category of its own in this space, which is confusing, but it is. And that was something we obviously had no idea what we were getting into. Like we've had a background in business intelligence, in data engineering before, so a little bit of data warehousing, and so this was very interesting, kind of lightly brushing on data science, but more in the data prep field. And then we realized, what this is and how big this is, and it's just the sheer amount of knowledge that the team has accumulated in a little short of 4 years at this point where we have been building this is incredible. We've got some super smart people on the team, and this is where I guess I consider it my success that we are building a place where people can grow like that. That's honestly the most satisfying thing. To see where people can fulfill their potential. And it sounds like something that you would read on an HR pamphlet somewhere, but like I really feel that actually.
So how about if I ask you about what is the most exciting project that you have ever done? So not maybe achievement, but the project.
So I think the most exciting could mean a few different things. So number one is a challenge. It's doing something something that's simply by its physical limitations hard. So as an example, we've got a customer where we are dealing with something like 170 million active monthly customers, users, and that's an interesting problem when you look at kind of under the hood of the technology category where we are. It's simply too big, so that itself is a very, very interesting challenge. But I think personally, it's the really real satisfaction is when we deploy a technology somewhere with a client. We've just had a great kind of a feedback from a couple of clients. One is a bank in Indonesia where they said, look, here is how it's not that we came to them to build a case study. It's actually they came to show us how they did a case study internally and show us where the impact is. And if you are charging someone large sums of money every year, and then they come to show you, here is how much money you've saved us, or how much resource, or how much you've elevated our practice and essentially make our ultimately the customer experience better. That's a super, super satisfying. I'm not in a space so much where I can share a lot of these details, but I think it's simply I find it super exciting to work on projects which are pushing the limitations a little bit, and the volume and the size of data can definitely be one frontier that we push. We're now looking at a client in an RFP process where we're looking at 500 million users, and that's getting even more exciting. It's so that frontier is being pushed a little bit by bit every year.
It sounds exciting. So, I want to come back to the topic of diversity and inclusion. And a lot of people who listen to this series, they are either watching this series, they're watching us on YouTube. So they are either aspiring data scientists or executives who want to get into data science. So if you were to give an advice of how to get into technology or STEM or data science, and you had to give this advice to women and men, so would you give them the same advice, or would the advice be different, and how would that advice be different?
I think the overall direction would be the same, but it would have different components. Not sure if I would say anything specific to guys, but I would probably have a lot more specific message for women. So let's start with the big picture here. So if someone is to get into whatever aspect of data, I would say before you jump into an SQL, Python course, whatever, learn the ecosystem first, because there is a lot more to data than writing a script in SQL or building a model in Python. And that's very, very important. Whether you're, whether you kind of look at it from a data scientist becoming that profession, or pursuing that career from a different perspectives. There are people who have a background in math, in statistics, and that's some people in economics and econometric modeling. So very, very different backgrounds. I think there seems to be a perception of a simplification where that this is all there is in this space. But when we kind of try to show the variety of this in one of the activities, that's the kind of the trademark for SheLovesData, which is simply called Intro to Data, and it's a half-day course where we really go through everything in the ecosystem, and we talk about scripting languages and hardware and software and applications and data and types and storing, and essentially all of the ecosystem that's built around it. Why do you need servers and databases, and what it even is? Because it sounds complicated from when you are far out, but when you get close to it, it actually resembles structures that are very similar to nature or other aspects of life. So there's a very easy to draw an analogy, because computers tend to save information and process information very similarly to human brain, and people can relate to that better. So I think it's that aspect that this field is way broader than it seems when you are far out. We have seen people pursuing career of a project management, which I actually find lot more complex in a sense than becoming purely and very narrow oriented data scientist who's just punching models one after another, where there's an aspect of human communication in that which is a lot more complex. I would probably have two different pieces of advice on top of that for women and for young people especially, because we see a lot of people coming in from university, and this is true especially in Asia, where I guess the education and studying model is slightly different than what we see and what we understand in Europe. And for the young people, it would be have an exposure outside of your field of expertise or study, because we see a lot of people who are coming out of especially the data science programs with impeccable math skills and a great resume and really like understanding of that field at all, but they don't understand business at all and or any other sphere per se. And this is super, super important. You can't do anything well if you don't understand a broader context. So you might be able to build a great model, but you're going to inherently build a bunch of biases into it because you don't understand how the world works and what to be aware of. So that's more for the, I guess, the younger people, and I generally tend to prefer myself the generalist model than the specialist model. So I guess my T is relatively longer and less tall, I would say. And for women, after I've been thinking about it quite a lot with the few years of the SheLovesData experience, and I think the one advice I would give is have a little bit more confidence, and if you don't have it, at least pretend you do, because this is a broad generalization, but if I kind of simplify it, if you take a problem and you throw it at two people, and one of them is your average data scientist guy and one is your average data scientist or analyst female, the answer from a guy is always going to be sure, or something along the way of sure, we're going to do it, I'm going to have a look at that. The typical answer we would get from the female analyst on that same problem would be something like, I have never done this before, I'm not sure it can be done, but I will try, maybe. And it's just about the perception of that answer. She might actually get to the result faster or even better, of course, but it's really that self-confidence that I think it's we are not seeing lack of technical skills, we are seeing a lack of confidence. And in part this is where some of the activities of SheLovesData have logically evolved into. So some of the workshops we have done in last year were really built around sort of soft skills, communication, and personal I guess not simply emotional intelligence, even though we have done some things in there, but really working on a self-perception and confidence as well, because it's apparently very important. And having my lens, which is probably a little bit more aware man than you typically find in business, but just a little bit. These things are super easy to overlook and not necessarily easy to recognize when you see them in communication. So I would say that would be the advice.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Yeah, so I want to sort of expand on this even more. So you, through SheLovesData, you work with women from many different countries, and you already mentioned the confidence issue that is quite, I guess, common to the whole group. So, in your opinion, what are the key problems that women face when, what do you see from your experience with these various communities in different countries? So what are the most frequent problems that women face when they want to go into STEM related professions or jobs, and perhaps maybe some highlights. I don't know whether they depend on the country, but maybe a couple of things that you can tell us what in terms of the most common problems.
So, and I think, look, this is please don't look at it as a presentation of research, right? This is really more of a kind of a personal experience and what I make.
Yes, absolutely. It's just from experience. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I would say that definitely the kind of the cultural barriers are there really. I think uh, men overall and specialists in any field in general tend to have a way of making themselves more important by presenting as everything that they do a lot more complicated than it really is or than it really needs to be. And then from an outside perspective, it probably seems as such, even though it's not really. And it's just this overcomplication of this space that you wouldn't, if you were to kind of walk into the room in the middle of a data science talk, you probably wouldn't know where to begin. But the matter of fact is that it's actually all can be simplified very well, and there is obviously a entry level content. So I think part of that problem is that the first encounters are simply not appropriate level often, and this can be scary. The other thing I would say is, and I definitely have noticed this initially when I was sitting on quite a few of our initial workshops from kind of Hong Kong to Indonesia, Singapore, and Australia, pretty much across the board. We've never made a difference in the content itself. It's always been an intro to data, as if you were going to pick up any type of curriculum from any institution. There was nothing that's women specific in there. It wasn't a pink font. It wasn't different writing and more pictures in the presentations. Not at all. It was all the same content. The difference was that there was a room full of other women, and it was very easy to connect and create, I guess, safe environment. And that's always been a keyword. But if you are going to walk in on data science group in Singapore, which I've been to their meetups a bunch of times, 95% and more guys. So imagine how does it feel in being that one person that sticks out from that group and you don't know even who to talk to. And on top of that, these guys typically don't tend to have the greatest people skills and communication skills in the world in general. Again, big generalization. There are data scientists that communicate way better than I can, and I ever will, but generally speaking. So I think that lack of that feeling of kind of the safety and ability to connect with others, with your peers specifically, is natural to people, and that's definitely what's missing. So you cannot go from 0 to 1 very quickly in that space. So this is obviously an very, very patient over long periods of time work that's happened. Interestingly, though, I have seen two trends and something that made this type of connectivity very easier, very easy. One thing, and I never could really grasp that, but it seems that, at least to me, it seemed that there are very equal roles in the business, in the business of data science or analytics in Indonesia, of all places. I don't understand it, but there seem to be fair amount of, at least from my perspective, and I've lived a year and a half in Jakarta until the pandemic hit, and we have got a team with Mero there. It's always seemed that it's very easy for women to absolutely go study anything that they want and get a career. And this seemed easier than in other markets. I don't know why. The other trend I have observed with our workshops was that there was a huge diversity in Australia, and I would say 85% plus of people who were visiting the workshops were immigrants of some type, so not natives to Australia, which obviously is extremely culturally diverse with all its benefits and cons to the country overall. But there's always been that aspect, and I do think it was because there are there is a more drive to learn new things, because that opens up an economic opportunities. And especially when English is not your first language, or whatever the country's native language is not your first, then you have to emphasize the skills over the ability to communicate. So it has always been there. So I kind of found different drivers in different places. One more interesting, I guess, observation from this perspective is that in Singapore, we would see that there is, it's a very, I know Singapore gets painted as this incredibly dynamic country, which it absolutely is. If you look at it infrastructure-wise and innovation-wise, it's incredible. But if you look at it on a personal level, there's definitely a level of conservatism where young people especially would be pressured by their parents to go get a job at the reputable bank, even though they are going to be very basic officer with very little, I guess, challenge in their path over next 15 years, rather than to go work at a startup. So that's always been there, and I would say extra level of caution that younger people would have. So that's a couple of trends kind of from all over the place I would have observed over last few years.
Yeah, sounds really interesting. So we had recently some debate with some of my friends on LinkedIn, where one of actually my former students, who's an executive student, and he said that, well, probably the worst sector for women is IT. And then there was a whole debate, and it's probably not the worst, there are places where it's even worse. And then some people agreed. So there was quite a big debate, and some people agreed, some disagreed. So in terms of sectors, is there like, do you see that there's definitely like some sectors are particularly better or particularly worse than others? Or is it pretty much, the same across the board in STEM-related occupations?
Yeah, I don't think I've ever focused on any one of those any one of those differences in particular. So I think everyone is going to have every sector or industry is going to have its own situation. But I think what really plays for STEM and I guess technology in general, and the equality becoming the status quo, is really the scarcity of talent. Like unfortunately, I don't want to say unfortunately, but I did. You still need humans to build programs, and whether those programs are based on data or whatever applications these are, that's most likely going to change in future. But because if you do that, and this is what, if you look at the world's most valuable and profitable businesses, this is all based around technology in the last 20 years. So I think this economic spur is definitely driving that equalization in a sense, because it has to, because the talent pool is very finite. So if you were focusing only on what's in it, you probably are then competing and pushing other aspects of it, like price, way out of proportion. So it's a very logical step in broadening your pool by being virtually more inclusive, by including more players in it. And I think that's a kind of playing for gender as well as other aspects. What I would like to see though in future is kind of this debate to go away from gender and having more of a balance in other aspects. I think one of the issues, if you look at it in startups, very specifically tech startups, is not really gender itself, but age. I think you don't really see many people over 50 working in startups, and that shows in the products, in the strategy, in the steps and missteps that they make. So I think that's more balancing the young drive with experience and strategy would be very helpful. That same thing goes to design. I don't think about diversity only as a gender issue. I think you have got you've got other aspects that needs to be brought to light in a way.
So we talked a lot about different various issues that women are facing, I guess what many people would be interested in is how SheLovesData actually helps. Like, how can you help the women who are looking for some support in getting into STEM and getting a job in STEM related occupation?
Look, it's changing a little bit, but when we started, we said that we want to focus on people, women, who are already in a workforce for one very good reason. If you are interested in data or you want to kind of flirt with the topic and you are in a university, well, take a course. Your university will probably have one or something close to it, or you kind of have the time and space to do that. Whereas we wanted to more focus on people who might be in one sort of trajectory of their career and are considering change, want another challenge, feel that after the way they evolve, they probably are better fitted for something else, but they don't really know where to start. So we kind of wanted to focus more on that kind of sort of career crossing in a sense. We had a lot of very positive feedback from very kind of a typical would be, I've been working in a bank for 10 years, database manager of some sort, working on one technology that obviously the legacy bank is maintaining until the whole bank will fall apart one day, as that kind of happens in that industry. So these the roles for these people would be absolutely static, like there would be no development whatsoever. And they realize that even though they might have studied computer science, 15 years ago and then held this job for 10 years, and then they went for maternity break for a couple of years, and then they come back and they realize that, well, the whole industry is basically new to them because there's a lot of skills and technologies that they didn't even know existed. So they need to start somewhere. So we would have that's one of the typical groups, or the other one was more I'm kind of somewhere in the business on the verge of having to closely work with IT with data, and I don't really understand that space, so I can't have a full conversation with these guys, which is very, very common. I think that's if we kind of talk about future proofing for careers, I honestly think that those people in the middle between the business and technology are probably the most valuable commodity for this century. But that's I guess the different angle. But what we do is we wanted to really do more of a introduction. We want to give people a taste. If you think of it as the samplers in a supermarket who give you like the latest yogurt flavor, we wanted to do that for data. We want to give you, hey, here's what it looks like. Here's how easy it is to build your own dashboard. Here's how you can interpret it. Here is how you can prepare the data for it. Here is what formats it is in. And you kind of get to try it a little bit, very, very tiny bit, but so you have the first-hand experience. So it's not all just a TED talk to you. And when you have done that, well, you realize, well, I'm probably suited for this or that is my path. Then we will help you to point you at the right resources, but we would not really do much more for you then. And then you can go take a semester course, which is actually going to make you, say junior level professional somewhere in something. And before you go get practical experience, and you can do all of that while maintaining a full-time job. So that would be an ideal session. We have always done it through more offline activation. So naturally, with pre-COVID, we used to run workshops in every city. I think at this point we are about 16 countries with local chapters purely run by volunteers. SheLovesData doesn't have a single employee at this point. We are just looking for a managing director in Asia, which is the first actually paid role within the business, within the organization. And that's kind of, it's going to grow a little bit from there, but so you can imagine how difficult it is to run a 16-country volunteering organization through Slack only, where everyone has a day job on top of that. So it's very, very tricky. So we would have done a variety of these programs, typically intro to data, then some specialization in either technology. We've done Tableau dashboarding and visualization with companies like Tableau, Yellowfin. TIBCO is a great partner partner of ours. And on top of that, we are now doing with Singapore Management University, the SMU, some type of a joint certification as well, which is finally a first step towards something that's actually applicable in a workspace. But it's really been more this like broader in sort of intro, and then kind of push people in the right direction and let them go into something a little bit more deeper, because simply we don't have in the organization the capacity or the infrastructure to do anything that the university would do, of course.
It sounds, sounds like you have a whole set of things that you're doing, from quite kind of soft advice to quite, pushing people to get education, which is awesome. Because normally I think the initiatives that I saw is mostly kind of you go to like some workshops, and normally people do not see much, much progress after those workshops. So it's great that you have this whole kind of systematic way of and holistic way of looking at that. So what I also wanted to ask you is, what do you think is the future? Like, will the situation improve? What will be the key challenges and key opportunities in the next 5 years? Will we see an improvement, or what would be the key things to think about going forward with this inclusion and diversity agenda?
I think it's going to get improved. I think it's improving already. It's just this type of improvement where you don't go quantum leaps in a year, but it's a steady improvement. I might be influenced and biased by the kind of the stories and feedback we get from these workshops, which I like to read, because it's really touching sometimes how you kind of have secondhandly changed someone's career and orientation in professional life, and make them realize that they are really passionate about something else that they have been pursuing. So this is really great. And I think honestly, there's a one driver behind this change, and I don't think it's a goodwill of people who want to participate in organizations like we do. I think it's that's necessary part of that whole movement. But I think the key driver and the fuel there is the economic growth, and especially of that whole tech space. It simply needs more bodies, and these bodies needs to be found somewhere. And the diversity is a one way of broadening that pool. So I think this is what's going to take care of that growth for us. Of course, the organizations like ourselves, ideally combined with more formal education institutions at some point anyway, are what is going to be driving this change. Would be really hard to do it if businesses were not getting involved. I've been on a kind of crossroads of marketing and for a long time, and if you kind of listen to the conversations in advertising, it's the same thing. It's we are not getting enough people from the schools, and when they are getting out of schools with marketing, they just don't have the essential skills that we need at this point, because the space has moved so fast and the schools are simply not catching up with that. But I think it's that's certainly an angle, but I think it's these industry players that it's not about giving back, it's about forming the landscape together. So I think there needs to be a lot more collaboration in the space, and that's combining the non-profit sector, the for-profit sector, as well as the education and the infrastructure. So I think that's what's going to be driving us to for these ultimately balanced, diverse ecosystems.
So you provided a lot of insight into diversity and inclusion, and I kind of want to, at the end of the interview, come back to you a little bit and ask you about what are you working on right now? I mean, I know that you can't tell us everything in detail, but at least if you could tell our audience, what are you, what makes you excited, what keeps you awake at night?
So a few things actually. So I kind of I'm not very good at doing multiple things at the same time, so I really have to pick one. And the main focus right now is the business. So it's what we do with Miro, and it's helping organizations to organize their customer data and structure it and be able to use it. We kind of have this saying in the company that that dashboards are where data goes to die, because it's where you put it in a dashboard and you bring it, print it on A4 paper into a boardroom, and that's it. So we care more about the activation of data and acting on insights rather than just a kind of the pure collection. So this is exciting. We're solving a lot of kind of communications and marketing use cases and problems. So that's also quite dynamic and different region to region, very different use cases with clients in Asia or Australia than what we see in Europe. So that's a challenge, and that's what makes it exciting. And I am also one of the things that gets me also super excited is I'm helping my sister with building her own little business, which is a juice bar, and that led me into hydroponics because we were looking at how to make it more self-sustainable. So now we're growing, under the LED lights, some spinach salad and looking at how to make this kind of business a little bit more sustainable. And I'm kind of unfortunately already seeing how to scale this up a little bit more into a few thousand square meters of growing operations, and questioning why everything we buy in supermarket comes from a country 1,000 miles away, and things like that. But unfortunately, I don't have enough space in a lifetime for all of these things that get me excited.
Yeah, sounds great. I mean, hydroponics definitely is really cool, and I have a 4-year-old son who is really excited about it. So you can also involve people of all ages into this, because it's just such a cool thing.
So affordable and available, right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, and so here come the kind of traditional questions that I ask all interviews at the end, and I have to say everyone complains about these questions. Well, almost everyone. I mean, lately I was getting people who were saying, "Oh, this is a piece of cake. I can quickly answer that." So a lot of questions that we normally get from the audience is around kind of what would you recommend to read, or what would you recommend to watch. So so the first question goes like this: if I ask you to recommend one book and one film, what would your recommendations be?
So this is tricky for many reasons. Number one, because I don't remember last time since I've been to movies. That's just that's just very,
It doesn't have
tricky
to
at this
be
point,
recent, and it doesn't have to be about diversity. It's just something you like. Yeah.
Yeah. No. I was just I'm trying not to spend so much time on the big screen afterward, because everything is Zoom calls these days. But so movies not really my thing. But funny enough, in the context of this conversation, the movie would probably have to be The Imitation Game, and there is a big recency bias. And this is obviously more. It's a great storytelling, number one, and I think importantly, reflection on that on the whole. I guess historical dealing with minorities, and I think the personal story of the Ring, even though this is obviously dramatized for a movie, is incredibly touching, and this is something that I've recently, I can't almost say I enjoyed it, but it's a very, very touching and very powerful movie in many aspects. So that's for the movie. For the book, I think any other year I would probably have to pick something else. I try to publish my reading list on LinkedIn every year. I think I've done it in the last 5 years for every single year, except for last one, which shows how odd it is. But I think in this year, and especially in the situation where we are, because I think, Czech Republic right now is one of the worst hit countries by COVID, and big part of it is obviously the way the government is handling or not handling it very well, as systemic issues there. So this year, my book tip probably would have to be Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, because I think COVID has been absolutely black swan event for a lot of people, losing jobs and relatives and close ones, and I think this is a book that I would recommend people to read if they have suffered because of this.
Yeah, brilliant suggestions. And so here's the last question that kind of aims to get some insight into interviewers' psychology a little bit, but this is something that I've added to the series in 2021. So, and then the question goes like this: who's your favorite fiction character?
Okay,
That's gonna be tough,
character.
considering that you are publishing reading lists every year. So, but
Yeah.
if you had to pick one,
If I had to pick one, it would have to be something from Tolkien because I can't recite the Lord of the Rings series from the top of my head, but I do enjoy it, and I especially enjoy it in the context of the kind of the first war that he was involved in, and the religion and everything else. Is very very um, uh, highly intelligent author for me. So it would probably have to be some character from there, probably someone like Bilbo Baggins, I would say. I think that's the Hobbits overall were a great analogy of the I guess the little humans in all of us, and I think that's probably my favorite. It's not just because it's great, but it's also because it shows the I guess the bad parts of us in a nice way, or weak parts.
sounds great. So there you go, brilliant insights on diversity and inclusion. And fantastic recommendations from Pavel Bulowski for you. And Pavel, thank you so much for finding the time today to talk to me. It was such a pleasure to have you with us, and keep up with the great work that you're doing. So I'm definitely going to be, following what you guys are doing with SheLovesData and with some other projects that you do at Miro, and good luck with everything. Sounds really exciting.
Thank you so much. Excited to be here. Great conversation. Thank you, Ganna.